quality. Now, they found that 3 months wasn't sufficient time, so most all of the states went to within a year. That didn't mean they were to wait a whole year, but it meant they were given up to a year to find these people if they moved into the hills of Vermont someplace and settled down, squatted on land or whatever, that they would have up to a year to find them. If they hadn't worn them out within a year, they became a part of the settled community, and they became citizens with voting rights in the town. Of course, they could get voting rights earlier if the town elected them to some office or voted to have them have voting rights. But they became official settled citizens if a year had elapsed. Now, what's interesting is that a number of these books where the records were kept, first they were kept in the town minutes, but it was hard to find them that way. So then after somewhere around 1808 or 9 or 10 in that period, most of the towns just kept a separate book of warning out. And practically everybody that came into the community, unless he was very well fixed financially and they knew the guy wasn't going to become destitute, but practically everybody that moved into the community was warned out of town. So it wasn't a disgrace. It was simply a precaution. It does not speak any can't infer that they were undesirable characters from that. It simply was the regular procedure that all the communities in that area used. And when they were warned out, they had to be warned out, therefore, within a year. Most communities would have warned them out as soon as they found they were present. So, consequently, as the book by Benton, which is a classical book called Warning Out in New England, as he points out, these lists are excellent lists for determining when people arrived in the community, because they would have warned them out just as soon as they found out they were there. Now, in Norwich, Vermont, the Smiths moved there. We don't, in the Smith account, we don't have any specific date, but Joseph's mother, in her account of their early life, mentioned that they had been living in Lebanon, New Hampshire, which is just across the river from Norwich, down maybe a mile and a half, and that when they moved from there, they moved to Norwich, Vermont, which is on the Connecticut River. It runs north and south and divides Vermont from New Hampshire. And this river town had kept a book, and in the book, under the date of March the 15th, I believe, or 16th, somewhere around there, the Joseph Smith family was one of the families that year that was warned out of town. Now, that means that it would have been an exercise in futility if they had arrived there, say, in 1814, and the town waited until March of 1816 to warn them out. It would have been pointless because more than a year would have expired. They had to have been warned out. In other words, they had to have arrived after March the 15th of 1815, and probably they didn't arrive until somewhere around February of 1816, and the town would have warned them out as soon as it became aware that they were there. In any event, what this does is that Joseph Smith's mother mentions that there were 3 crop failures that took place, and then they moved after the 3rd crop failure to western New York, to Palmyra. And the Mormons understand that Joseph Smith's family got into Palmyra in 1816, and therefore they have to have the Smiths in Norwich in 1814 and 15 and 16, and then leave in the fall of 1816. Well, now that won't hold up any longer because, for one thing, they're still in the tax rolls in Lebanon in 1814. And while they could have been there as early as April of 1815, they would have had to still been in Lebanon in 1817 in order to make the thing work out to 3 years. What I think really happened was that they didn't get there until 1816, around February or early part of March, and were warned out shortly after they arrived there. And the 3 years of crop failure would have to be 1817, 18, and 19. And therefore they wouldn't have, 16, 17, and 18, therefore they wouldn't have left for Palmyra until over the winter of 1818, 1819. And so while the father certainly could have been there, and the tax rolls show he was, the rest of the family, I don't think, came on until 1819. And the reason I say that, Alvin turned 21 in February of 1819. And yet, in the April list of road tax records, looking at the whole of Palmyra, there is no Alvin Smith listed, and he would have been 21, as I said, in February of 1819, so he should have appeared on the tax rolls. Now, there's always a possibility that the guy goofed, the overseer forgot to record him, but it does not seem too likely, since the overseer through those years was, oddly enough, a James White. He was one of the local storekeepers, and certainly would have known people that were doing business with his store. His was the most prominent store in Palmyra. So therefore, I think that the Mormons have, again, another chronological problem of getting the Smiths into Palmyra before they really got there. The father's there, but I don't think that the family comes. If I might add one more thing, the weather report for the New England area was faithfully kept by the Farmer's Almanac. And each almanac for the ensuing year had a page in it which rehearsed and reviewed the weather for the previous year. So 1814's weather appeared in the 1815 almanac, and 1815's weather appeared in the 1816 almanac. And these are still active, and the Farmer's Almanac is still published, and the company has a complete file all the way back to the beginning. Well, when you look at those, you find that 1814 and 1815 were very good growing years. But 1816 was when they had that snow in the middle of June, 18 inches of snow that wiped out nearly everything. 1816 and froze to death was the great slogan that's bandied around. But then in 1817, in the summer, they had an eighth of an inch of ice on all the crops in the middle of June. And 1818 started off with such a cold spring that they had late planting, and then they had over 3 weeks of drought in August, which ruined a lot of crops. So I think those are the 3 years of crop failure. And the Smiths, if you credit Joseph Smith's mother with any accurate memory at all, which may not be the case, but if you credit her, and Mormons have always done that and built their whole story on her statements, then you cannot get Joseph Smith's family out of Palmyra, out of Norwich, going to Palmyra until sometime late in 1818 or early 1819.
And how long did they stay in Palmyra, according to the story?
Well, according to the story,